He's the neurodivergent. I'm going to keep trying to make that happen. You're here listening to the Shine Like a Penny podcast, where we discuss neurodivergence and disability. I'm your host, Larissa Minner, and today I'm going to be chatting with our guest, Ashiish Patil. Today we're talking about adult autism identification, as well as a lovely children's book called Goldie Boy and the Three Apes with our guest, Ashiish Patil. But I would like to get started with Ashiish. Could you just explain a little bit more about your background? It's so interesting with you being a CEO or an ex-CEO of India MTV.
Thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. I was very excited to talk with you as well. You've been so kind also in sharing your feedback about the book. So I was also, and I've been following all the content that you've been creating, and it's lovely to see. So, if at all, to give you a very brief background about myself. So I'm based out of Mumbai, India. My background is I'm a writer. I started my career writing copy in advertising. I was heading MTV, the music channel. Then the movie bug bit me. So I joined one of the leading film studios. It's called Yashraj Films. It's like the Disney of India. So produced a few films, or produced a few web series, bunch of music videos, and all of that. And I went independent about 4.5 years back. Uh, and that's when I kind of published this book. On the personal front, my wife's a chartered accountant. That's like a CPA. She covers the business side. And our son, who's going to be 18 in a couple of months, is on the autism spectrum. We diagnosed him when he was about 2.5. And that's when our journey into autism and neurodivergence, one started working with our son, observing, going to therapies, reading up to understand this world a lot more. I realized that I found so many similarities between, Rishan, that's my son, and myself. And thanks to my son, actually, I realized that I probably need to get myself formally checked out as well. That's when I went for a formal assessment, and I found out that I'm a late diagnosed autistic myself. So I got my formal assessment literally about 2 months back at the age of 50. So that's when I started my journey. So yes, I'm a writer, author, producer, director, autism dad, and a late diagnosed autistic myself. Uh, and it's Ashiish Patil. So very excited to be here.
I've heard a lot about autistic women that get diagnosed after their children get diagnosed. I hear less about autistic men. I just thought it was very interesting that you started realizing you were autistic after your son was identified as being autistic.
It's interesting you should say that, Larissa, because, especially in India, typically, it's a very socially conservative society. I mean, things are changing as the economy progresses, as education and literacy kind of go up. But I think just the general lack of awareness and understanding about disabilities still very, very high. And there is a certain amount of, for lack of phrases, stigma associated with disability, and that kind of also gets accentuated with all these male perceptions that you've got to keep, I mean, you've got to be the man of the house, you've got to be strong, you can't show your vulnerable side. So there's always that whole play out which kind of happens, and which is probably why I think a very keen observation that you made, that often you find women getting diagnosed late after pregnancy, after they have a child. And at times, even if men kind of potentially observe it, they kind of keep it in, possibly. I think that's probably also what happened to me. I think initially, forget about myself. I think as far as our son's diagnosis is concerned, um, I think I was in denial for the longest time, that I refused to accept it. I think it's a very silly, almost a selfish point of view, where I said, you know what, it's like a kid imagines that if you close your eyes, the problem will, it's not even a problem, but you think it'll go away, you know and that's how I turned to work as a tool, not just to escape, but to cope with all that was going on in my head. I was kind of overwhelmed with that. And I think over a period of time, as I think women tend to be just a lot more sensitive, a lot more plugged in, a lot more acutely aware, uh, and a lot more sensible, for lack of phrases. I think my wife helped me just really understand this world and come to terms with so much more. And I think that's when I, recognized and realized that I had been masking for the longest time. It's things that as a child I didn't understand. As a teenager, it's things that I ignored, and as an adult, I hid those things. So it was almost like a firewall. My default setting was attempt or go for perfection. Like everything's got to just turn out right. It was, I was talking to my wife about your emails. I mean, it almost felt like I'm writing to myself because it was so accurate, it was so precise, the brief that you had for it. I mean, it was so specific. I felt like I was talking to myself, and I was like, hey, I feel seen, I feel heard, and I'm not alone. And I think at times some of those things can be very exhausting, and you realize you're kind of using some of those elements to belong, to feel, like you're overcompensating to not feel left out, not feel less in any way. And at times that can be exhausting. And when I saw my son live out his life so authentically as himself, and I think post the pandemic and the lockdown, we're kind of done with those physical masks as well. It's exhausting,
Right.
and it's actually tiring when you feel like uh, like I seem like a very easy to get along person. Like I'm easy to talk to. I'm fun to talk to. I mean, my sense of humor is my firewall. It's my tool to cope with things. But even a casual friends gathering, or if it's a family reunion, or even if it's some old friends from college, if I'm meeting them, like 3 days up ahead, I will start going into serious stress. Like it's almost like I'm scripting what I'm going to say. It's like I have and my background is writing and films, right? So I write out full screenplays with dialogues, the lines I will say, and in case it's like a branch out, like Bandersnatch and Black Mirror. That if someone says this, this will happen. If they don't say this, but I say this instead, then this will happen. So it's like I've scripted it out, and then even if it goes really well, because it's just friends hanging out, I need literally 36 to 48 hours to kind of recover from that. I just need to be kind of left alone. So these are all things that are kind of getting to me, and I think at this age and stage of my life, I realized I needed that clarity. It was not for requiring any kind of label, but I think it's just that clarity that I needed for myself, that okay, here is who I am, and how long can I keep trying to be someone else or trying to be something I'm not. And I think my son gave me that confidence or the courage to get out there and do that. So like a cloud is lifted off my head.
I can relate to a lot of what you said. It's probably not a surprise to you that I also have masked without realizing it.
Of course.
And masking is hiding or minimizing your neurodivergent traits. And this can be both a conscious or unconscious decision. Is usually a defensive mechanism to trauma, and that can include being teased, bullied, or excluded, or trauma. I mean, it's all trauma. But anyway, that is masking in a nutshell. Masking can include numerous behaviors. Completely agree about the masking. And I can also relate to feeling exhausted even before talking to friends. I think that's a really common challenge. I just was wondering if you had any other challenges that you want to share with either yourself or your son that you face as neurodivergent people.
You know, it's multifold, right? I mean, think so. The external challenge is that the world is just not designed for people like us. The primary challenge out here in the world in general and in India in specific is just a lack of awareness and the lack of understanding. And I think when people are not aware or do not understand things, that's when they fear it, or that's when they run away from it, or kind of discriminate against it, or different is never. I mean, it's difficult to accept for most people. That's why people go for the norm or neurotypical things, typical things. And you realize the difference is what actually gives you, makes the world more interesting, if nothing else, and helps us progress. So I think that's the primary challenge, just the lack of knowledge and understanding. Uh, Also, the challenge comes in because it's not visible. Some of these disabilities are not necessarily visible. Like when they look at my son, or they don't understand. Like in that sense, from a career standpoint, I look like a super achiever. I look like I've been very successful and all of that. And they don't realize disability could also look at this. I myself couldn't understand that. So I think when it's invisible, it also gets harder to accept. When friends, family look at my son, the typical reaction, what's wrong with him? I mean, he looks fine. He looks normal. And I'm like, no, that's not it, right? I think it's, well, finally, I think, like I said, look, I mean, if you see my t-shirt, it says normal is just a dryer setting. You know, it's literally that, right? I don't know what the definition of normal is. It's just a different normal, right? So I think first primary challenge is the outside, that lack of awareness, understanding. Minute that comes in, the sooner that can come in, the world will become that much more not just inclusive, more interesting, and way more progressive. I think that's challenge number one. The challenge number two is, I think, what comes with our unique wiring with autism, uh, in terms of just processing information and experiences and sensations differently. Uh, and some of these things at time kind of slow you down or hold you up. Some of these things actually give you an edge. So, for instance, I think that's the reason why I have a because my brain is wired differently. I see things that not a lot of people are able to see. I'm able to conceive ideas or things which are lying under our nose that no one will observe. And it's like, hey, you know what? Goldie Boy and the Three Bears, as a classic fairy tale, wrote about a girl who finds things too hot or too cold or too hard or too soft. It's very likely she was sensory sensitive. It's right under our noses. Not too many people will catch that. And that's where an idea happens saying, hey, you know what, there's a story stick. Or it could be other creative ideas that I have come up with. That So that gives you a unique edge. At the same time, there are things, at times you land up. I think the classic definition of waste of time when you're doing something which is unimportant, trying to do it perfectly. Like, I know it's a waste of time. I'll give you a silly example. Like, the vessels or the utensils or dishes that need to get washed. I like them stacked in a particular way. Waste so much time every day trying to just structure it or index it or whatever. And I'm telling myself that don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. But I just can't help myself. So, and that's still relatively harmless. There might be things which at times can lead you to some kind of an addiction with something, or a certain, a lack of a filter, in terms of even when having a conversation. Like, I find it very difficult at times to be dishonest. So,
Right.
in an industry like media and entertainment, when you're invited for a movie screening, people expect you to be polite, even if you hated the film. I can't help myself but be honest. You know, like, how the film? I think it was absolutely rubbish. I was like, oh my god, this guy's really insensitive. I can't help myself. I've learned over a period of time to be able to kind of, maybe not attend it or be nice, even if I'm honest. But I mean, these are just two or three. So at times they don't help you.
Now, what you said about the being too honest, I have struggled sometimes with that myself. When I give feedback, sometimes I give really detailed feedback, which does not always go well.
The most, I would say, harmful, if not harmful, that has been a challenge for me is not being able to read people properly.
Yeah.
I'm just that's and my default setting is people are nice. My default setting is people are honest. My default setting is people are not selfish, because that's how you are and that's how you imagine. And at times, because of
Right.
that, you get taken advantage of, and that's happened to me so often. And from people who you really like, from people who you trusted, and you've never wished anyone ill. And when that happens, that kind of really breaks your heart. I think it's better to err on the side of being nice. So I don't think that's not even something I want to change. It has harmed me often, enough number of times in the past. But you know what? I'll live with that. I'll work with that. I think it's just a better way to be. Sorry, long answer.
No, that was great. I definitely agree that disability awareness is important. That's something that I'm trying to advocate for, and I know a lot of people are advocating for. Which
Yeah.
I know you were trying to do that with your book
Yes.
as well. But I'm trying to get education in schools and higher education about disability, and then to get universal design, changes everyone has access to help with sensory needs, and try to normalize it because it's very normal behavior. But man, it's not an easy task for uh,
Yes, it's a journey. I mean, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think you said something really nice right now. I think starting that early, I think it should be part of curriculum design. In terms of,
Yes.
I mean, just it's as important as literacy. Because there are special schools, but there is no special world. We don't live in a bubble, and you can't. We all have to live with
Right.
each other. So I think it's so important that, and it's never too early or never too late to start your journey of understanding neurodiversity and diversity and differences in general. So the sooner you can start a child off, and I've always seen that, at times it used to annoy me in the past, and we've always been very open with our son. We travel extensively, and I'm saying this because there are people in India who at times will restrict movement or keep their kids locked away at home because they're not equipped to travel, and I find that terrible. It's like a golden cage of sorts, and that's I don't want that would be terrible, right? So we travel
Right.
extensively, we go with our son, and at times people are not able to understand. Some people get weirded out that why is he stimming, why is he flat, why is he being noisy, why is he singing out loud, or why is he behaving a certain way. The Rishan is not born to be a walking, talking public service announcement like a PSA, but it is a great opportunity for me to educate people or make people aware that, hey, it's fine. Here's why. At times I will take the effort. At times you'll say, let it go. It's not worth it. But I've always found that minute people understand or know about it, they're a lot nicer. So the sooner you can start that, and I would say in school, like in kindergarten, that's where you start looking at differences. All five fingers are not the same. Why should people be? So I mean,
Yeah.
that would life would just boring. I mean, if you just had vanilla ice cream every day, that would just suck. I mean, I would want chocolate sauce, a little bit of sprinklies, and other things to go with it.
Yeah. I 100% agree that it should start from kindergarten on, and they should continue with higher education to educate on accessibility as well. But something you said about your son stimming in public, I recognize, at least I found it a little similar to what I read in your book. So I was just wondering if that was inspiration or if there were other inspirations for writing your book. Just explain a little bit what inspired you to write your book, Goldie Boy and the Three Apes. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's Goldilocks and Three Apes, uh, and I think the backdrop is this is a children's picture book, and I think the starting point was really when I found out that I think there is so little information and material and literature available to create awareness. I think most of the material that's there I've found as I was researching or just generally reading up in the journey is it's either very technical or very academic, or at times it's a very memoir, and I say this with no disrespect, but it's a bit of a sad story,
Yeah.
so which, and it's a very it's a fun world actually. Honestly, I mean, Rishan has made us, I mean, I would be a very different person if not for autism and if not for Rishan. I'd probably not be half as interesting. I'm not sure I'm very interesting right now, but I would certainly be way more boring that way. Found a potential gap saying I don't think there's enough material over there to educate people early enough. One, two, whatever's there is not very positive, uplifting, and fun. So these were two essential trigger points for me, and you remix it. So I said, let me modernize Goldilocks and the Three Bears, well, turn it into Goldie Boy. Goldilocks became Goldie Boy because I wanted a gender switch to because it's inspired by my son. So Goldilocks actually looks like the character. I mean, visually resembles my son. So that became one kind of flip.
Oh,
So that's our son Rishan, yeah, and that's the character Goldie Boy. So very similar visually. So it's based on him.
yeah.
So that kind of happened. That's one part of it. And then we said, I thought let's bring in a lot of modern references. So which is why from Bollywood, which is one of Rishan's tools. Like music is his tool to calm his social anxiety. Whenever he's feeling anxious, he goes to chants, he goes to calming music to kind of you know compose himself. So I said, let's bring in music. So that became one element. All things which are almost like red herrings, which I'm sure you'll pick up. For example, the book that uh, Papa Ape is reading, and we changed the bears to apes because I wanted it to be very modern. So they flipped the bears into the apes. The book that Papa Ape is reading is Temple Grandin, who's a legend, of course, in the autism community.
Yes.
The podcast that Mama Ape is listening to, because I hadn't met you by then, or I would have quoted our podcast, was a Spectrumly Speaking podcast. So that's the podcast that Mama Ape is. The playlist that Baby Ape is listening to is Billie Eilish because she has Tourette's, or the blanket that they find under the drawer is a weighted blanket. So it's all of those elements which are seeded, which you already know that, hey, there's something going on, that which is why Mama Ape connects saying, hey, these guys are very similar. Oh yes, I get it. And all of those elements of how music is something that Goldie uses to sing out loud to connect. Some people get weirded out. Some people get attracted by that. Then the things that he finds sensory sensitive, like the blanket that kind of pokes him a little, or things that he finds too, the smell overwhelms him in the pasta, on the food dish. So all of those things were inspired by him, and we spent about a year kind of designing this. We want to make sure every frame, brings the story alive, is visually beautiful to look at. So that's how all of those elements, and things like the fact that all of us tend to use technology very smartly. So that's why there's an iPad in there. Now, if you also look at the iPad in here, the iPad in the book doesn't have an apple at the back. It actually has a banana. So it's things
It's
like that.
those details.
Yeah. So all of that small detailing is, so all of those elements is what we kind of brought in. Those were the inspirations, and then you started layering and layering, and the story kind of wrote itself. Then, the other thing I've found, Larissa, is that misinformation is more dangerous than no information.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of that in our community. So, as far as entertainment narratives are concerned, not just in India but globally, either we are unrepresented or underrepresented. I mean, we just don't exist, as a community, or it's misrepresented in the form of, there is pity porn, as I call it. That, oh, poor thing, that kind of thing which you see in reality shows, which is really offensive. Or
Yeah.
it's inspiration porn, where and while some of these the intentions are very positive, but the way it plays out in, like, say, a Good Doctor, or some of the films that have happened in India, they kind of play it out saying, man, he's a genius. And not everyone's an autistic savant, or not everyone is like,
Yeah.
Completely
you know
agree. You need better representation.
or it's just insensitive, where people play up disability for comedy. And that happens a lot, also in some of our films in India, like where you're playing up, like a speech impairment, or like a stammer for a joke, or a hearing impairment, saying, hey, speak louder, that kind of thing. And I find that very offensive. So I want to make sure I also get the nuances right. I mean, fortunately, I live in this world, but what I did is, after I finished a draft, I shared it with a bunch of experts. So some of the biggest, most respected autism experts. Is this easy to understand? Are you getting it? Is it simple enough? So I sent it out to a bunch of people to make sure I get the language, and the flow and the detailing right. And the intent was to also create a 360 on it. That it's not just a book. We also created some gear around it. So, like this sweatshirt, this hoodie. We've done a bunch of T-shirts which are there. We did a bunch of zippers. This says, different, not less. Or I this one this particular line is my personal favorite. It says, weird and wow. I love that line. That's a line on a
Right.
T-shirt. So we brought in all of those things, and what we're doing is, all my earnings from the book are all going to a center for autism, and other neurological differences. So we're donating 100% of that into that center, so it can potentially support people who can't afford therapy, etc., and pay for that. So yeah, so that's the inspiration for the book, and hopefully get out there.
Thank you for sharing all of that information. And I really do like the details and the illustrations that you shared. I had noted before that you had consulted with numerous experts. And that's something I appreciate. I was just curious, did you also, I get this could be more complex, but did you get feedback from different children or has that happened yet?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. So I, of course, read it to my son. He was, of course, thrilled to see himself and his lived experiences come alive in a book form. I also bounced it off with a couple of, like I said, neurotypical kids, a couple of neurodivergent folks, uh, to also assess it for, is it, I mean, the book finally can't be a speech, it has to be a fun story. So did they react? So I got great feedback on that as well, in terms of, it's just really it's gorgeous to look at. It's, typical children's books are about 24 pages or 40 pages. This one it's like a coffee table book, right? It's about 130 pages, but it's visual. It's like a flip book, so it's gorgeous to look at. So I think that really kind of pulls you in. Every frame looks really attractive and appealing, and all of these then smaller elements of auditory sensitivity that he uses, noise cancellation headphones, all of those things then you catch. And it was interesting that one of the kids who we bounced it off actually happened to mention that, uncle, that there is a kid just like this in my classroom. I used to wonder why he behaves this way. Now that I read it, I think he reminds me of Goldie Boy, or vice versa. And that's exactly, I said, and that's it. I think we've delivered our purpose on the book. So that's, besides the visual appeal, I think the fact that you start recognizing these things, that, it's so uncanny, right? Because of the way it's an invisible disability, that it's very likely that most people know someone with autism and they don't even know it. Now, I know the amount of people who've read this who've said, hey, there was a girl in my classroom who's just like this. Or there's this guy in my office who sits for lunch by himself or doesn't come for office parties, but now I kind of get it why. Or I have an uncle who's just like this, or hey, maybe this is probably my story. So there's a lot of that which I think the book has enabled, which I think I found in the initial feedback. So I think that helped me feel that yes, I'm on the right track. So yes, I did bounce it off with a few kids, both neurotypical as well as neurodivergent folks. In fact, a couple of them are quoted in the book. If you see, there's a group called Much Spectrum. There's these two neurodivergent folks called Aditi and Alap. It's a neurodivergent couple, very young, very bright, who I bounced off the book with, and I mean they had wonderful things to say. So I think we don't get to see too many things in pop culture that mirrors or reflects us. We're not able to see ourselves on screen. So I think minute when you see a lead character that is like us, you feel like you've been seen and you've been heard. So that's the kind of feedback that I've been getting, which I find is very heartening.
Because some studies on children's book actually showed the opposite towards disability, but they're older, outdated studies. Uh, I definitely think it's worth trying, and it sounds from your description that it's already working with children that have read it. I agree with a lot of what you said about that,
Sure.
especially with introducing the concept of neurodivergence to children. I think that's so important. I know we already talked about it a little bit, but uh, I appreciate that you highlighted that process. That was interesting. That we both had that same idea that we wanted it to be fun. I think reading the humor and the the beauty of your book, because I do think it's beautiful to look at. I think that's really important that it's visually appealing. I did want to clarify where we can find your book,
Yes.
like where it's available, and if it's available now, or if not, when it will be available.
Sure. So, the book is launched in India, so it's available at every leading bookstore in India, all the big chains. It's also available online across Amazon and I mean everywhere else where you get books. The merchandise that I mentioned, the Goldie Boy gear that we've designed, all the T-shirts and the all the hoodies and the sweatshirts and all those fun things that we've done. These are also available, to shop online. It's off Instagram on a page called Redesign Official, which is REDESYN, Redesign Official.
Really helpful. And to clarify, the proceeds from the book that will be given to autism.
That's right. Most likely we will be doing this with me. That's the center. It's a very respected, been in the business for upwards of 2 decades. And actually, that's the place where we first found out about Rishan's diagnosis. So it's called Umi Child Development Center. So most likely we will go after that. We're just working out the logistics in terms of, the taxation parts, etc. But all proceeds, like I said, every penny from my earnings from the book are going to go into that Center for Autism.
I think that's great that you're doing that. Was there anything else before we wrap it up that you wanted to add about your book or about anything related to the topics? I just want to give you a chance.
Sure. Well, honestly, like I said, I think it's awareness and understanding that helps create acceptance and helps eventually get you to that part of celebration. And that's just so important because I think differences make us unique. Our differences make the world not just more inclusive, they make it stronger. And I think it's like I said, never too early or never too late to start your journey of allyship, of understanding, accepting, and celebrating these differences. There's a variety of ways you can do that. I think one great way to do that is not just starting with this book, it could be anything. Ideally, as the saying in the community goes, nothing about us without us. Seek out people from the community, actually autistic creators. I mean, it need not be me, it could be anyone else. There's a bunch of very interesting people, and it need not be a book. Your tool could be a video, it could be a social blog, it could be a podcast, it could be whatever else. But all consume so much content. I think consume some of that, it will make you more complete as a person. And I think start that early, start that now, and that will really help. I think the world just become more inclusive and a better place.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know you touched on it earlier, but for early education, studies suggest that it's important to correct misconceptions and emphasize how we are similar, as well as focus on the importance of inclusion, which I feel like you touched on. And I just wanted to thank you again for being on this podcast today. I really appreciate it. And I hope anyone listening out there will want to learn more about neurodiversity and neurodivergence and check out Goldie Boy and the Three Apes or other content by other autistic creators. And thank you.